You know, sometimes I still hear my uncle's voice in my head. Noah doesn't even know what a will is, Mia. You're being dramatic. That was the moment I knew my family would sell their souls for money, especially if the money wasn't theirs. High. I'm Mia, 28 years old, and the only daughter of a man who built an empire from nothing, an empire he hoped would protect his family long after he was gone. But this isn't a rags to riches story. This is a riches to rubble story. And trust me, nothing feels more powerful than watching people who crushed your brother's dreams beg you for mercy. And getting to say, no, let me take you. Back. My brother Noah was born with cerebral palsy. He can't speak very well, and he's wheelchair bound. But he understands everything maybe more than most people do. Growing up, we were best friends. I was the loud one, always arguing with teachers or fixing problems. Noah was calm, observant, always with a quiet little grin that made you feel like he knew more than he let on. Our parents, especially Dad, adored him. Dad always said, "When I'm gone, I want to know Noah will be okay." And I believed him. But what I didn't realize was that Dad's plans, his trust funds, his lawyers, his carefully written will, they'd all mean nothing when my aunts and uncles got involved. Dad passed away. Suddenly in late winter. I remember the cold air that day. It wasn't just the weather. It was the feeling of silence that followed. Like the world had paused. Noah didn't speak. He just held Dad's watch in his hand for hours. I think it was his way of grieving. The funeral was a blur. People we hadn't seen in years showed up hugging us, crying, making speeches. Behind the fake tears, I noticed something else. Greed. Eyes, glancing at the estate folder. Conversations whispered in corners. I didn't want to believe it. I thought, no way. Not our family. That I was so wrong. A week after the funeral, I got a call from the family lawyer, Mr. Cordell. We need all immediate heirs to come to the office. When I arrived, I expected the usual legal jargon. Maybe some formal reading. What I didn't expect was for the lawyer to clear his throat and say, "There have been a few last-minute amendments to the trust." I blinked. What? He shifted. Uncomfortably. Your father's original plan included equal inheritance for you and a dedicated trust for Noah's lifelong care. That trust has been redirected. Redirected to who? I asked, my voice trembling. He hesitated. To your Uncle James and Aunt Tessa, as co-guardians of Noah's interests. I exploded. What? My dad would never put them in charge of Noah. They barely even visit him. Uncle James leaned back, smug. Well, sweetheart, your father was a smart man. Maybe he realized you couldn't handle it. Aunt Tessa smirked, flipping her hair like she was on some reality show. You're young, emotional, and with your job history. Mia, please. I looked at the lawyer, fuming. This is a lie. My father would never have signed that. Cordell looked ashamed. It's signed and witnessed. The changes were submitted 2 days before your father's passing. I stared at the date. 2 days before his heart attack. 2 days when Dad was bedridden, in pain, barely able to speak. And now, somehow, he'd rewritten his entire estate. Noah's $2.4 million trust fund, his care plan, his medical allowances, gone, redirected to the 2 people who never even remembered his birthday. That's when I knew. This wasn't just some clerical mess dash-up. This was war. Asterisk. That night, I stood outside the old family house, Noah sleeping, quietly inside, and confronted James and Tessa in the driveway. You forged those documents. I don't know how, but I swear I'll find out. James smiled like a man who'd already won. Mia, Grow up. The world doesn't reward soft hearts. Tessa added with a grin, You should be grateful. We're going to take good care of him. And that means we need funds, darling. You couldn't do it anyway. You're broke. And then they laughed. In my face, like I was some clueless little girl playing detective. Like they thought I'd cry and walk away. Instead, I smiled. Not because I was okay, but because I remembered something my father used to say. People always show you who they are when money's on the table. Your job isn't to fight fire with fire. It's to quietly pour gasoline where they can't see it. That night, I made a decision. They wanted to play dirty? Fine. But I was going to win. Not with shouting, not with fists, but with facts. Time. Before going to bed, I sat beside Noah and held his hand. I'm gonna fix this, I whispered. I don't care how long it takes. I'll burn their whole empire to the ground if I have to. He blinked, slowly smiled, and pressed his hand to his heart. That was all I needed. The storm had begun, but they didn't know. I was the stormed or asterisk. They thought I would give up. They thought the paperwork and legal jargon would scare me away. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't just angry. I was methodical. And every moment I stayed quiet, I was gathering something more powerful than rage. I was gathering proof. The next morning, I took a personal leave from work. My boss didn't even hesitate. He knew I'd been dealing with family matters. What he didn't know was that I had no intention of returning until I had cracked every lie my uncle and aunt had manufactured. I started by calling every number in my dad's contact list. His personal assistant, his accountant, even the gardener who'd worked at our estate for 15 years. No one knew anything about him changing his will. Except one name kept coming up, Mitchell Grant, a name I had never heard in my life. Apparently, he was some estate consultant my Uncle James had brought in shortly before Dad passed. I did a little digging and found out that Grant had been disbarred 5 years earlier for unethical practices. I was getting closer, but it wasn't enough. Noah's money was already moved. The paperwork was clean on the surface, and James and Tessa were smugly sitting on their throne of lies, throwing parties and shopping for a new vacation home. So, I did what any underdog does when the system is built against them. I started from the outside and worked my way in. I got a part-time job at a legal records office across the city under an alias. I figured if I couldn't get into my uncle's accounts through the front door, I'd build a back door of my own. I filed papers, fetched coffee, ran errands, and in between I learned. I read everything I could about guardianship laws, estate fraud, and trust mismanagement. I took notes. I observed patterns. I watched how real estate transfers and financial disclosures left trails. No matter how deep people tried to bury them. It was like learning to read a language no one wanted me to understand. And then, 6 weeks in, I found it. A small transfer. Insignificant to most. A $9,400 transaction from one of my father's old accounts to a holding company in Delaware. Buried under layers of shell corporations. Almost didn't notice it, but something about the name attached to the transfer screamed fake. So I dug further. And that's when I discovered the first of many accounts. James had opened accounts tied to Noah's stolen trust fund. That was the moment I stopped feeling helpless. That was the moment the fire in my chest turned into strategy. The first domino was ready to fall. I quietly began building my team. A former IRS investigator I met through a friend. A retired estate lawyer who specialized in financial abuse cases. And a forensic accountant who loved puzzles more than people. They weren't cheap, but I had some savings and one thing I'd inherited from my dad, my relentless grit. I told them everything. And once they saw the documents, the trail, the fake names, the fraudulent witnesses, They were furious. "This is more than unethical," the accountant said. "This is criminal." Still, I wasn't ready to strike. Because here's the thing about revenge. If you want it to last, you don't rush it. So while they continued parading around with stolen money, I continued acting like the grieving, helpless niece. I even brought them wine once during one of their parties. Tessa kissed me on the cheek and told me I was finally maturing. I had to stop myself from laughing. Noah, meanwhile, was doing okay. I made sure of that. I visited him daily, helped him with his therapy, cooked his meals, and every time he looked at me, I knew he knew I was up to something. But he never asked. He trusted me, and I wasn't about to let him down. 3 months after I started the investigation, I filed my first anonymous complaint with the state's Adult Protective Services alleging financial abuse of a disabled adult. It was the first shot. It triggered a review of the guardianship arrangements. James and Tessa were notified of an upcoming inquiry. And boy, did the smiles disappear fast. Suddenly, I was getting late-night texts from them. "Hey Mia, we'd love to sit down and talk things over. Let's keep this in the family, huh?" I ignored every message. Then came the day of the inquiry. A social worker named Angela visited the house. I made sure I was there. James tried to act polite, but I could see the sweat on his forehead. Angela was thorough. She interviewed Noah, asked for financial statements, and took pictures of everything down to the medication labels. That night, Tessa showed up at my door. Furious. Double quotes, "How dare you do this to us?" I smiled. "How dare you do this to him?" She hissed. "We're his guardians. You're just his sister." I leaned in. "And soon you'll be his ex-guardians." The days that followed were brutal for them. The social worker uncovered inconsistencies in expense reports, payments made to luxury spas, private chefs, and out-of-state vacations, none of which benefited Noah. The guardianship hearing was set, but I wasn't done. I was about to make it public. Asterisk. Using my friend at a local news station, I anonymously leaked documents outlining potential estate fraud. The segment aired on a Thursday night during prime time. Names were blurred, but the story hit a nerve. Viewers were outraged. The comments flooded in. How could a family steal from someone disabled? What kind of monsters would do this? The next morning, I walked past James in a grocery store. He looked pale. I winked. "Nice watch," I said, glancing at his $12,000 Rolex. He didn't reply, but his hand went straight to his wrist, like he was afraid I'd take that too. And maybe I would. Because I was just getting started. Asterisk. They say silence is a weapon. That sometimes the scariest person in the room is the one who doesn't raise their voice. That was me now. Noah didn't ask questions. He just watched me more intently than usual, like he was piecing together the shift in the air. I could tell. He felt it. Something had changed. I wasn't just his sister anymore. I was becoming his sword. The day of the guardianship hearing arrived faster than I expected. I hadn't seen James or Tessa in 2 weeks, not since the news segment aired. But I'd heard things. That their neighbors were asking questions. That their golf club membership was suspended pending review. That my aunt hadn't slept in days. Good. I wore my plainest clothes that day. No jewelry, no designer anything. Just a quiet blue blouse, flat shoes, and my father's watch on my wrist, the one Noah had held for hours after Dad died. That was the only armor I needed. We sat in a small courtroom with grey walls and a single judge who looked like he'd seen far too many people lie for money. James and Tessa sat on the opposite bench, their lawyer whispering frantically into their ears. Tessa wouldn't even look at me. Noah was beside me, hands folded in his lap, calm, still. But those big eyes of his, they were locked onto the judge like he understood every word, every move. And he did. When the judge asked if we had anything to present before the hearing began, I stood. I handed over 2 thick folders. Inside were copies of every transaction tied to Noah's trust that didn't benefit him. Spa visits, 5-star vacations, payments to a consulting firm run by James's college friend, and a donation, yes, a donation to a luxury yacht club. The judge took a long time flipping through the pages. Then he looked up. He asked James and Tessa to explain the charges. On the documents, their lawyer jumped up, saying it was all within fair administrative usage, that the expenses supported the caretaker's well-being, which in turn helped the ward. I almost laughed, but instead I waited because the judge didn't look convinced. He turned to me again and asked if there were any witnesses. I hesitated for a second. Then I turned to Noah and touched his arm. "You ready?" I whispered. He nodded once. I helped him to the front. People underestimate my brother. All the time. Because he's quiet. Because his words come slowly. But when he wants to speak, he makes every single one count. He looked at the judge and said, carefully but clearly, "They used my name and stole my life." You could hear a pin drop. The judge blinked, then leaned forward almost as if he didn't believe what he'd heard. Noah took a shaky breath and added, "Dad trusted them. They broke it. Mia protected me." That was it. That was all he needed to say. Because in that moment, no amount of legal excuses or shiny presentations could override the power of a single, broken voice calling out the truth. The judge revoked their guardianship. It was unanimous. Noah was reassigned to my care with immediate effect, and an independent investigation into misuse of funds was ordered. The court froze their assets pending outcome. The sound of the gavel slamming down was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I didn't look at James or Tessa as we walked out. I didn't have to. I knew they were crumbling. But I wasn't done yet. Because I wasn't just after justice. I was after everything they stole. The house. The money. Their fake friends. Their comfort. Everything. And I knew exactly how to take it all back. One piece at a time. First came the forensic audit. I worked with my accountant friend to file a formal request with the state's fraud unit. It took weeks of documentation, phone calls, interviews, and endless paperwork, but I was relentless. Then came the IRS. Once they realized some of those stolen trust funds had been declared as personal gifts and not income, an audit was triggered on James's and Tessa's joint tax filings. 3 years' worth. Then I made an anonymous tip to the luxury retirement villa they were applying to join. Just a polite note to check their financial history before accepting any new residents. Then came the banks. I froze a co-signed account they tried to use under Noah's name. When they called, yelling, I calmly informed them that any account involving Noah was now legally under my oversight. And if they had a problem with that, they could speak to the judge. By the time their court date for estate fraud arrived, they were drowning in debt and shame. Their lawyer had dropped them. They represented themselves, fumbling, panicking, contradicting each other. The courtroom was cold. I sat in the back with Noah beside me, watching the destruction unfold like a slow, satisfying play. And then the final verdict came. Not only were they found guilty of financial mismanagement, but they were also ordered to repay every cent plus penalties. They lost everything. Their house went first. The vacation property in Maui? Repossessed. The car? Towed. The furniture? Liquidated at auction. And still, they were short. So the court made a decision. Their remaining asset stocks, bonds, retirement funds were seized and transferred to a recovery fund set up for Noah's long-term care. I watched the wire confirmation on my laptop at midnight. Noah S. account was whole again. And this time, no one could touch it but me. You'd think I'd feel triumphant. I didn't. I just felt quiet, like a storm that had finally passed. That night, Noah and I sat on the porch of our new home. Not a mansion, not flashy, but warm, peaceful. He looked at me, his eyes soft, and placed his hand on my shoulder. Then slowly he signed something. I trust you. And that meant more than any courtroom victory ever could, because they took everything from him. But I gave it back, and I did it without shouting, without begging. I did it by becoming everything they never saw coming. A sister with nothing to lose, and everything to protect. And I wasn't done yet, not even close. After the verdict, most people assumed the story ended. Justice was served. Money was returned. Guardianship was transferred. The greedy relatives got what they deserved. But stories like this don't end in a courtroom. Not really. Because the damage, it lingers. Even after the accounts were drained and the judgments finalized, James and Tessa didn't disappear. No. People like them don't go quietly. They slink back into the shadows, whispering lies, twisting truths, always hoping to regain a little of the power they lost at first. It was subtle. A neighbor casually mentioned they'd spoken to Tessa at the grocery store, and she'd told them. I brainwashed the judge. Then someone from our old church said James claimed the documents had been doctored, that I had tricked everyone. I ignored it. For a while, I told myself it doesn't matter what they say. The truth had won. Noah was safe. The money was safe. But then I received a letter. A thick, expensive envelope slipped into my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a cease and desist. Tessa was threatening legal action, accusing me of defamation, emotional distress, and public character assassination. She claimed the anonymous news tip that started the firestorm was traced back to me and had ruined her reputation and career. I laughed when I read it. The nerve. But then I saw the last line. She was demanding $300,000 in damages. Or else, she'd go public with the truth. I almost threw it out. But instead, I folded it up neatly and put it in a file labeled desperate. Because I realized something. They weren't just embarrassed. They were afraid. Afraid of how far I'd come, of how much I knew. Of the fact that I didn't just survive their betrayal, I dismantled it. So I did what I always do. I got quiet. I called my lawyer. Not the one from the guardianship case, a new one. One who specialized in civil defense and had a nasty reputation for loving courtroom humiliation. She read the letter once, then looked at me and grinned. They picked the wrong woman to threaten, she said. Let me handle it. And she did. We filed a counterclaim listing every public lie they told about me. Every time they slandered my name in town. Every time they accused me of being unstable, dramatic, or unfit to care for my brother. We attached social media screenshots, witness statements, even one audio recording from a friend who overheard them bragging about taking Mia down. They tried to backtrack immediately. Suddenly, their lawyers were re-evaluating the situation. They offered to drop their suit if I dropped mine. I didn't. Because I wanted it in the records. I wanted the world to see what they were. People who'd weaponize sympathy the moment their money dried up. They settled out of court, eventually paid me $50,000 for damages and signed a public statement admitting to false claims. That money? I put it toward a new therapy wing for Noah. He smiled when I told him. Just smiled and gave me a slow thumbs up. Then finally it got quiet. Truly quiet. No more letters. No more whispers. No more poisoned phone calls or sideways glances. Noah and I started living again. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. We took walks in the park. I started working part-time from home again, easing back into graphic design projects. He painted. Watercolors mostly. Peaceful, abstract things. Soft, slow color bleeding across paper. Just like the way he sees the world. People started noticing. They'd pass by our porch and say hello. A few even apologized for believing the rumors. And somehow, life began to bloom again. But one day, a man showed up at my door. Mid-50s. Suit jacket. Clean shoes. Introduced himself as a lawyer. But not just any lawyer. He was from a major non-profit. One that specialized in disability rights and financial protection for vulnerable adults. Apparently, someone had sent them a copy of my court filings, my evidence, my story. He wanted to talk. We sat on the porch. Noah joined us, sipping his juice slowly like always. The lawyer said, "We think you could help others. Speak. Educate. Maybe even consult with our legal teams on similar cases." I was stunned. I had never thought of myself as an advocate. I was just a sister who got mad enough to learn the law. But maybe that was enough. Noah reached over, patted my hand and smiled. That night, I said yes. I started small. A few Zoom meetings, panels, case reviews. But word spread. People started calling me, asking for help, sharing their stories, and I listened, because I knew what it was like to feel alone in a house full of wolves. What it was like to scream the truth into a void and hear nothing back. But I also knew what it was like to win. To fight. And win. Asterisk, asterisk. Some people fight their whole lives just to be heard once. That used to be me. Screaming into silence, begging people to believe that just because Noah couldn't speak the way they didn't mean he didn't understand, that he didn't hurt, that he didn't deserve the same dignity as everyone else. Now people listened, not because I was louder, but because I had proof. I had receipts. I had justice in my corner, and that changed everything. The speaking engagements picked up quickly. First, I was invited to a webinar for families navigating guardianship systems. Then, a legal aid nonprofit asked me to share our story with their interns. After that, a university class, a conference, a radio spot. My name was getting passed around like wildfire. Not because I was anyone special, but because I'd done something terrifyingly rare. I'd taken down my own family. And won. I made one rule, though. Noah always had to be part of the story. I wouldn't speak unless he was introduced first, unless his artwork was shown, his smile displayed, his voice, however limited, acknowledged. I wasn't the hero. I was the sword. He was the soul. One day, I was on a panel with 2 attorneys and a senator advocating for stricter protections for dependent adults. At the end, someone asked if I had any advice for others going through the same thing. I took a breath, and I said, "You don't have to be a lawyer to demand justice. You just have to be willing to outlast their lies." That quote somehow ended up on a few advocacy posters. People started emailing, direct messaging, asking how I did it, asking how they could do the same. But what really changed things was the video. It was a clip someone took during a panel. Just me, holding Noah's hand on stage, explaining how my family laughed when they thought I couldn't stop them, how they used love as camouflage. How they underestimated silence. It went viral. A few thousand views at first. Then 1 million. Then 3 million. People started calling me the sister who fought back. Noah's paintings started selling online. Someone from a gallery in Chicago reached out, asking if they could showcase his work. A full exhibition, silent, peaceful, full of heart. Just like him, I cried when they installed the first canvas. On a clean white wall under soft lighting. It was one he'd done right after the case ended. Blues and golds, swirled in a way that made you feel like you were inside a dream. They called it freedom. And somehow, it sold for more than I made in 6 months. That's when I realized something. Something I hadn't dared to hope before. Weren't just surviving anymore. We were thriving. And while James and Tessa had faded into their own grey world of quiet disgrace and financial ruin, Noah was blooming. He laughed more. He painted for hours. He even started typing with one finger. On a modified laptop. His words were slow, but deliberate, thoughtful. One night, I came into the room and found a message blinking on the screen. I am proud of you. I stood there, blinking back tears. Because no matter how many court victories or interviews I gave, that was the only validation I ever needed. But even with everything going right, I still had moments of doubt. Still had nights where I'd lie awake, wondering how I let it happen in the first place. How I didn't see what my family was capable of sooner. It's funny. How trauma doesn't just vanish with a verdict. It lingers in the cracks. I remember one night, maybe around 2 a.m., I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through emails. When I got one from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line. Just a message. You think you've won? You destroyed us. You'll regret this. No name, no signature. But I knew. Tessa. It wasn't a direct threat, nothing I could report. Just that sharp, cold stab of resentment, carefully cloaked in vagueness. All it did was make me stronger. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to my lawyer, had it documented, and moved on. Because the truth was, I didn't need to lift a finger anymore. They were already living the consequences. I had given them every opportunity to do right by Noah. I'd begged. I'd reasoned. I'd cried. They chose greed. And when the smoke cleared, all they had left were memories of a life they destroyed with their own hands. That was their punishment. Mine was peace. And maybe that's the most dangerous kind of revenge. There is becoming everything they swore you could never be. A protector. A force. A future. Noah and I kept building. We started a little non-profit, just something small. A place where siblings of disabled adults could get help, get resources, talk freely. I named it Quiet Power, because that's what we were. And slowly, stories started pouring in. From kids in the foster system, from elderly caregivers, from exhausted sisters and overworked brothers, all saying the same thing. I thought I was alone. Now they weren't. Because I had been alone, too. And I knew what it felt like to drown in your own family's betrayal. But I also knew how to swim. Noah. I weren't just surviving the storm anymore. We had learned how to dance in it. And together, we were just getting started. Asterisk. It's funny how people only remember the noise, the scandal, the courtroom drama, the headlines. But they forget the quiet parts. The parts where you have to rebuild yourself from the inside out. One quiet act at a time. Part 6 of our story was full of that. Less drama. More healing. But don't mistake quiet for weakness. In those quiet days, Noah and I grew stronger than we ever were before. We moved into a 1-story house with a sunroom that became his art studio. He'd open the windows and let the wind play with his papers while he painted. Blues, greens, calm swirls. I'd bring him tea, and we'd sit in silence, letting the light fill the room like hope we didn't have before. The nonprofit grew too. At first, it was just a few calls a week. Then emails. Then group Zoom sessions. Then someone suggested we start doing workshops teaching siblings how to protect legal rights, how to read a guardianship contract, how to spot financial abuse. Before it starts, I didn't think I had the energy for all of that. But then I met Ava. She was 16. Her older brother had Down syndrome. Their parents had passed a year earlier, and now an uncle was pressuring her to sign guardianship over to him. He was too busy to care for her brother, but wanted control of the trust fund her parents. Left Behind. Sound familiar? She came to one of our online sessions with her camera off. Didn't speak much. Then one night, after everyone had left the call, she messaged me privately. "Can I ask you something?" I stayed up until 2 a.m. talking to her. And when she finally turned on her camera, I saw someone I recognized. Tired. Eyes, unsure shoulders, but burning with that same fire I'd once buried deep in myself. She said, "I'm scared, but I want to fight. I just don't know how." I told her what someone once told me. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room. You just have to be the most prepared. I connected her with a pro bono attorney, helped her gather documents, walked her through the process. A few months later, she wrote me again. "Court awarded me guardianship. He doesn't get a cent. I'm moving my brother in next week. Thank you." That was the first time I cried in a long time. Not out of grief, but because I realized something. Every person I helped was proof that what happened to us didn't end with us. It was becoming a blueprint. The funny thing is, people started treating me like I was fearless. But I wasn't. I was terrified every step of the way. I was just too stubborn to give up. And that was enough. As the seasons passed, Noah blossomed. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. He was more expressive than ever. Typing with more confidence. Painting with bolder colors. Even teasing me, in his own way, leaving little typed jokes around the house on sticky notes. Once he left one on the fridge that said, "Mia's tea. Tastes like grass. Send help." I laughed for 10 minutes. We started doing joint interviews now. He'd sit beside me, responding with his tablet. Audiences loved him. They called us the unstoppable siblings. People donated to the nonprofit. A company even offered Noah a design contract. His artwork would be featured on their line of planners and journals. You should have seen his face. He smiled so big it practically broke. But every success reminded me of the price we paid to get here. There are still nights I wake up thinking about the day I found out about the forged will. The way they smirked. The helplessness I felt. And then, just as quickly, I remember what came after. The fight. The fire. The win. Some part of me will always carry the bruises from that time. But they're just that, bruises, not open wounds. One day, while we were driving home from a community event, Noah typed something out in the passenger seat. "I want to tell my story. On video. With you." I looked at him stunned. "You sure?" He nodded. So we did. We set up 2 chairs in his studio. Just the 2 of us, facing a single camera. I didn't wear makeup. He wore his favorite hoodie. It wasn't flashy. It was honest. We told the story together. From start to finish. What they did. What we lost. What we built. No anger. No shouting. Just the truth. It went online with no promotion. And within days, it had hundreds of thousands of views. Comments flooded in. Some from people in the same situation. Some from total strangers. But the one that hit me the hardest said, "Your strength made me believe in mine." That's when I really knew, we were doing more than healing. We were empowering. That was the real victory. Asterisk asterisk grief doesn't vanish just because justice arrives. That's something no one tells you. People think once you've won, everything feels better. That the satisfaction of being right somehow fills the hole left by betrayal. But the truth is, winning doesn't bring back what you lost. It just stops you from losing more. I still miss Dad. I missed the quiet way he used to run his thumb over his wedding ring while thinking. I missed the way he'd squeeze my shoulder before making a big decision, or how he'd always remember to buy 2 scoops of strawberry ice cream, because Noah liked it best. Some nights, I'd wake up thinking I heard him in the hallway, humming off key. But it would just be the wind, or Noah moving through the kitchen for a late-night snack. Life moved forward anyway. The nonprofit grew beyond anything I expected. We hired our first part-time assistant, then a therapist, then a legal liaison to help families navigate the early red tape. It was slow, honest work, the kind that leaves you exhausted but content. Noah's art exploded. Not just sales, impact. His paintings were being featured in galleries in 4 different states. A local museum ran a month-long Silent Voices exhibit, where they displayed works by non-verbal or semi-verbal artists. And Noah's quiet victory piece was the centerpiece. Was a swirl of deep purples and warm golds, with a single white line cutting through the center. Calm, confident, undeniable. He didn't explain what it meant. He never did, but I didn't need him to. I felt it. We were finally being seen. Both of us. As more than just victims of a greedy family. As more than a cautionary tale. We were creators now. Builders. Survivors who didn't just survive, we thrived. Then, something unexpected happened. James reached out. An email. No subject. Just 3 words. I'm sorry. Please. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. For a week, I kept reopening it, reading it again, staring at the space between the words, as if some greater apology might emerge if I looked long enough. It didn't. So I archived it, because forgiveness, that's a luxury. And I wasn't there yet. Maybe I never would be. Tessa tried too. A letter this time. Handwritten, full of the usual theatrics, how she'd lost everything, how she was in therapy, how she understood now the depth of the pain she caused. Almost laughed when I saw the PS. You were always the smart one. I just didn't see it until too late. I folded it up and put it in the same file as the cease and desist letter she once sent. Let them stay together. Sometimes, closure doesn't come from reconciliation. Sometimes it comes from choosing not to reopen wounds that have finally started to scar over. Noah never asked about them. Not once. He'd moved on far before I had. He was the stronger one, in many ways. Always had been. One Saturday, as we sat on the porch watching the sky turn orange with sunset, he typed something that made me pause. You saved me. I looked at him, heart aching. You saved me first. He smiled, then added, let's help more. I laughed. We already are. He shook his head, pointed to the tablet, and typed again. Bigger. That one word was like a spark. And just like that, a new idea took root. We'd spent the last year helping others react, guiding families after the betrayal, after the damage. But what if we got ahead of it? What if we taught them how to prevent it? We brainstormed for hours that night. Noah even sketched out a new logo. A tree with deep roots and outstretched branches. I called it the Guardian Project. An initiative to educate families before tragedy hit. School seminars, legal prep kits, survivor-led training sessions, financial literacy for siblings and caretakers. We wanted to make sure what happened to us didn't become someone else's reality. Launching it took months. And money. And so much paperwork I thought I'd lose my mind. But the community rallied. Donors stepped forward. Volunteers offered their time. A tech company even offered to build our web platform for free after watching our story online. And on launch day, we had over 1,000 families sign up for the first free workshop. Noah watched the live counterclimb on the screen, eyes wide. Then he typed, slowly and carefully, "You were the storm. Now you're the sun." I couldn't speak for a minute. Because how do you respond to something like that? All I could do was lean over and hug him tightly. Because he was right. Had become something else now. Not a woman seeking revenge, but a woman building a world in its aftermath. One where justice wasn't an accident, but the standard. Moment, I realized something even bigger than everything we'd fought for. Sometimes, your pain becomes your purpose. And when that happens, the people who tried to break you, they become footnotes. Asterisk. People used to call me dramatic, emotional, too intense, overprotective of Noah, too opinionated. Now they called me a leader. But the truth is I hadn't changed. I just stopped apologizing for being the person I'd always been. That's what part 8 of our story felt like. Not a fight, not a win, but a return. A return to myself. The version of me I had to bury for so long just to survive under the weight of family expectations, manipulation, and quiet gaslighting. Now she was alive again. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I had purpose. The Guardian project took off faster than I could keep up with. Every week, more schools signed on. Parents reached out. Social workers asked if they could integrate our materials into their training. We created interactive modules, printables, survivor testimonial libraries. And every time a family sent a message saying, "We didn't know we could do this. Thank you," I knew it was working. Noah became our silent co-founder. His artwork soft. Watercolors with hidden messages in brush strokes became our visual identity. His voice, though typed, guided everything. When we were offered a partnership with a national foundation, he typed 2 words in response. Only ethical. I laughed. Because of course he wanted to vet everything for integrity. He didn't speak often, but when he did, it mattered. One morning, I received an invitation to speak at a national legal summit on disability rights. It was a huge honor. People 3 times more qualified than me were on the list. But they wanted me to close the event with Noah beside me. We prepped for weeks. I wasn't nervous. Not really. But I felt the weight of it. Like our whole story had been building to this moment. I stood on stage in front of hundreds of professionals, judges, attorneys, advocates, social workers, and told them what had happened to us. Not just the facts, the feelings, the humiliation of watching people you love steal from someone who trusts them, the rage of being dismissed, the exhaustion of trying to fix something the world told you couldn't be fixed. And then I told them what came after. How we fought, how we healed, how we built, how we created something that now protected thousands. When I finished, I turned to Noah. He was already typing. He held up the screen. It said, "Protect the quiet ones. We have things to say." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. We got a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of people came up to us. Some shook our hands. Some cried. Some just said, "Thank you," and walked away. But one woman lingered. Late 40s, kind eyes. She wore a cheap suit but stood tall. "I was you," she said. "Years ago. I tried to speak up when my sister was being mistreated. No one listened. I wish I'd had this back then." I didn't say anything. I just hugged her. Because that's what this was really about. Every person who didn't have the tools, the language, the backup. Now they had something. Noah and I flew home that night, exhausted but light. We sat in silence on the plane, watching the clouds pass. And I thought, maybe this is peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. At home, the seasons had begun to change. Fall was creeping in, leaves turning, wind shifting. Noah started painting in deeper colors, maroons, rusts, dark blues. Not sad, just grounded, strong. He called one of his pieces Rooted. I stared at it for a long time before realizing that's what we were now. Rooted. Not in fear, not in chaos. But in truth. We've gone through fire and somehow came out planted, not scorched. And every branch we grew, every person we helped, was proof of that. One evening, I got a call from our first client, Ava, the 16-year-old who fought for her brother. She was 19 now, studying social work. She said, "I'm applying for an internship at Quiet Power. I want to help the next me." I hung up the call and cried. Because it hit me, in that moment, just how far we'd come. That we weren't just changing lives. We were starting legacies. Noah rolled into the room and handed me a sticky note. "You okay?" I nodded, wiped my eyes, and smiled, more than okay. Asterisk, asterisk. Some victories come with parades. Ours came with a kitchen full of sticky notes. Noah had started leaving them everywhere, tiny, quiet messages that said everything he didn't need to speak aloud. One on the fridge. Tea was better today. Less grass. One on my laptop, proud of you. One on my favorite coffee mug. Breathe. And somehow, those little squares of paper became more powerful than all the speeches, all the interviews, all the headlines. They were reminders. Our life now wasn't about proving anything. It was about living it. A phone call from the local hospital. The administrator wanted to meet. In private. I agreed, not knowing what to expect. I assumed maybe they wanted a donation or a referral, or help designing a sensitivity training module. We'd done that sort of thing before. But this meeting was different. They sat me down and said, "We're launching a new community initiative to train medical staff on identifying financial abuse in vulnerable adults. And we want to name the program after your family." I blinked. The Collins Protocol. I swallowed hard. My throat burned. Not from sadness, just shock. They showed me the draft. An interdisciplinary guideline named in honor of our case. A permanent part of their training programs. Our nightmare turned into education. I looked over the sample modules. They covered everything. Red flags of exploitation, trauma-informed care, legal referrals, how to speak to disabled patients not around them. I said yes, of course. But when I told Noah, he did something rare. He shook his head, then typed, "Not Collins. Protocol. Call it Noah's voice." I smiled. Of course. They agreed instantly. So now, every new doctor, nurse, and social worker trained at that hospital would read about Noah. Not as a patient, not as a file, but as a voice. And that's when I realized just how permanent some victories can be. They echo. In people you'll never meet, in families you'll never see, in moments that might never make headlines, that save lives all the same. It wasn't long after that when we were contacted by a documentary team. They'd seen our video, heard the interviews. They wanted to tell our story start to finish. I was hesitant at first. It felt invasive, like opening old wounds we had finally let scab over. But Noah? He said yes immediately. Not with words, just a look, a nod, a quiet kind of certainty that told me, it's time. So we let them in. They filmed us painting, working, sitting on the porch with mugs of hot tea. They interviewed old friends, our lawyer, even Ava, who was now an intern at our non-profit. They asked if we wanted to confront James and Tessa. On camera. We said no. Not because we were afraid, but because the story was no longer about them. Never really had been. It was about Noah. And what happens when someone finally listens. The documentary took months to finish. It debuted at a small film festival, then was picked up by a streaming platform. I didn't expect it to blow up, but it did. People messaged us from around the world: New Zealand, South Africa, Finland, Brazil. Some said, "This saved my family." Others just wrote, "Thank you. I feel less alone." The title? Noah's Voice. A Quiet Revolution. He blushed when he saw it on the home screen. Then typed a note that said, "You're famous now. Don't let it go to your head." I stuck it on the fridge next to the one about tea, and life kept moving. The nonprofit gained national support. We launched an emergency legal aid fund for families in crisis. Noah's art was featured on a line of greeting cards with empowering messages for caregivers and survivors. People started calling him a visionary. He didn't understand the fuss. He still painted on the floor half the time, still wore the same beat-up hoodie, still refused to eat anything with mayonnaise in it. But his world had grown. And so had mine. One afternoon, while cleaning, I found an old envelope tucked in the back of my closet. Faded. Torn. Dad's handwriting. On the front. It was a letter. One he'd written for me the year before he passed. Never sent. Probably forgot. It said, "Mia, I don't say this enough, but I watch the way you protect Noah. The way you carry more than your share without ever complaining. You were always the fighter in this family. Someday, the world is going to see what I already know. You're a force. Keep going. Dad." I sat down right there on the floor and wept. Not out of grief, but out of finally knowing. I had become the person he saw all along. Sometimes, the hardest battles aren't the ones fought in courtrooms or in front of crowds. They're the ones fought in the quiet moments, when doubt creeps in, when fear whispers, when you wonder if you're enough. But if you've come this far, if you're still reading, then you know something important. You are. Because that's the real story here. Not about stolen money, or broken families, or battles won and lost. It's about resilience. About finding light in the darkest places. About becoming more than the sum of your scars. That's what Noah and I became. More than victims, more than survivors. We became guardians of hope. And as I look back on everything, the pain, the fight, the victories, I realized it was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming life. About protecting what matters most. And loving fiercely. Even when it felt impossible. Noah smiles at me from across the room. He types slowly on his tablet. Together, unstoppable. And in that moment, I know it's true. Because no matter what comes next, we'll face it side by side. As siblings. As warriors. As family. Thank you for listening to our story. If you or someone you know is facing similar challenges, remember, you are not alone, and your voice matters. Thanks for watching. Hoped you liked it. If you watched till the end, please comment revenge. What do you want to hear from us in next video? If you have any incident in your life, please let us know. We would love to share your story.